The early morning mist clung to the forest floor like a whispered secret. Tall pine trees stood sentinel in the gray dawn light, their branches heavy with moisture from the night's gentle rain. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the earthy scent of damp leaves and moss. Natalie Moore adjusted the small children's backpack on her shoulders and checked her watch. She was running late for the bus that would take her and her 4-year-old son Leo into town for his doctor's appointment. The main road would take them 20 minutes to walk, but the forest path would cut that time in half. At 29, Natalie had the practical efficiency of someone who had learned to manage every minute of her day. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her worn wool sweater was clean but showed signs of careful mending. Her jeans had a small patch on one knee, where Leo had convinced her to play soccer in the backyard. "Mama, can we see the squirrels today?" Leo asked, skipping ahead on the narrow forest trail. His bright red jacket made him easy to spot among the muted colors of the woodland morning. "Maybe, sweetheart," Natalie replied, watching carefully as he explored the path ahead. "But we need to stay on the trail and keep moving. We can't miss our bus." Leo was an energetic child with an insatiable curiosity about the world around him. He collected interesting rocks, asked endless questions about animals, and had a talent for finding adventure in the most ordinary situations. They had been walking for about 10 minutes when Leo suddenly veered off the main path, chasing what looked like a colorful bird. "Leo, come back here," Natalie called, but her son had already disappeared behind a cluster of thick bushes. She heard him shout excitedly, "Mama! Mama! Come look at this!" Natalie hurried after him, pushing through the undergrowth. She found Leo standing near a small clearing, staring at what appeared to be a slightly raised mound of earth. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a natural formation, or perhaps an old animal burrow. But as Natalie approached, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A human hand was protruding from the dirt. "Leo, step back," Natalie said firmly, fighting to keep the panic out of her voice. "Step way back, sweetheart." She moved closer to investigate. The hand was pale and obviously belonged to an adult. But as she knelt down, she realized with shock that the person was still alive. She could see slight movement, labored breathing. "Hello," she called softly. "Can you hear me?" A muffled voice responded from beneath the earth. "Help! Please!" Natalie's mind raced. Someone had been buried alive, but not completely. They had been left with their head and shoulders above ground, but the weight of the soil was clearly making breathing difficult. "I'm going to help you," Natalie said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Just stay calm." She began digging frantically with her bare hands, scooping away handfuls of loose dirt and debris. The soil was damp and heavy, but it hadn't been completely packed down. Someone had buried this person recently, and not very deeply. As she worked, more of the person became visible. It was a middle-aged man in what had once been an expensive suit. His face was dirty and streaked with tears, but his eyes were alert and focused on her with desperate gratitude. Don't call the police," he whispered urgently as she cleared more dirt from around his chest. Someone is trying to kill me. They might still be watching." Natalie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. This wasn't an accident or a tragic mishap. This was attempted murder. But she didn't stop digging. Whatever this man had done, or whoever wanted him dead, she couldn't leave another human being buried alive in the woods. After several minutes of intense work, she had cleared enough soil for the man to pull himself free. He was weak and shaking, but he managed to crawl out of what had very nearly become his grave. The man sat on the ground for a moment, breathing heavily and looking around as if he couldn't quite believe he was alive. Then he turned to Natalie with an expression of profound gratitude, mixed with something else, something that looked like wonder. "You saved my life," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "You don't even know who I am, but you saved my life." He paused, studying her face intently. "I will never forget your face," he continued, his words carrying a weight that made Natalie feel as though this moment would somehow change everything. "Never. Not as long as I live." Leo had been watching from a safe distance, his young mind trying to process what he had just witnessed. He approached cautiously and slipped his small hand into his mother's. "Mama," he whispered, "is the man okay now?" Natalie squeezed her son's hand reassuringly. "Yes, sweetheart. The man is going to be okay now. But as she looked at the stranger's intense gaze and heard the conviction in his promise to remember her, Natalie had the distinct feeling that nothing would ever be quite the same again. Where are you watching this video right now? At home, in a cafe, or maybe while you're out and about? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing from each and every one of you. Natalie Moore had learned to find joy in the small victories of single motherhood. Every morning when Leo woke up healthy and happy, every evening when she managed to put a nutritious dinner on their tiny table, every month when she successfully paid all their bills, these were the moments that kept her going. She lived in a modest apartment in a rural town about an hour outside the city. The rent was affordable because the building was older and the neighborhood wasn't particularly fashionable. But it was safe, clean, and had a small playground where Leo could burn off energy after daycare. Natalie's daily routine was carefully choreographed to maximize both income and time with her son. She worked 3 part-time jobs that she had strategically chosen for their flexibility. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, she provided childcare for 2 working mothers in town. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings, she waited tables at Mike's Diner during the dinner rush. Weekends, she ran a small online business selling handmade crafts and children's clothes. None of these jobs paid particularly well, but together they provided just enough to cover their basic expenses. Natalie had become expert at stretching every dollar, finding bargains, and making do with less. Her journey to single motherhood hadn't been planned, but she had embraced it completely. Leo's father had left when she was 6 months pregnant, unable to handle the responsibility of parenthood. Rather than feeling sorry for herself, Natalie had channeled her energy into preparing for her new role. She had taken parenting classes, read every book she could find about child development, and saved every penny to create a stable home for her baby. When Leo was born, Natalie felt like she had found her true purpose in life. The challenges were real and constant. There were nights when Natalie lay awake worrying about unexpected expenses or childcare arrangements. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed by the weight of being solely responsible for another human being's well-being, but there were also incredible rewards. Leo was a bright, curious, affectionate child who brought laughter and wonder into Natalie's life every day. He was learning to read, ask thoughtful questions about everything around him, and had an innate kindness that made Natalie proud of the person he was becoming. The morning when they encountered the buried man, Natalie and Leo had been heading into town for Leo's routine pediatric checkup. These appointments were important to Natalie, who wanted to make sure her son received the best possible health care, even on their limited budget. She had chosen to take the forest path partly to save time, but also because Leo loved observing wildlife and collecting interesting stones to add to his bedroom collection. These small adventures made even necessary trips feel special. When Natalie discovered the man buried in the woods, her first instinct was pure human compassion. She didn't consider whether helping him might be dangerous or time-consuming. She didn't worry about missing their bus or rescheduling Leo's appointment. She simply saw someone in desperate need and responded immediately. This reaction was entirely consistent with Natalie's character. Throughout her life, she had been the person others turned to in crisis situations. In high school, she had tutored struggling classmates without charge. During college, she had volunteered at homeless shelters and food banks. Even now, with her own financial constraints, she regularly helped elderly neighbors with grocery shopping and minor household repairs. Natalie's approach to helping others was practical and direct. She didn't overthink situations or create complicated conditions for providing assistance. When she saw a need she could meet, she met it. This philosophy had shaped how she approached single motherhood as well. Rather than focusing on what Leo lacked by not having a father present, Natalie concentrated on providing him with stability, love, and strong moral guidance. She wanted him to understand that helping others wasn't something you did when it was convenient or easy. It was something you did because it was right. After helping the buried man to safety, Natalie's primary concern was getting him to medical attention. She drove him to the small rural hospital in the next town, making sure he received proper care before she left. She provided her contact information to the hospital staff in case they needed additional details about how she had found him. But Natalie didn't expect or want anything in return for her help. She certainly didn't imagine that her spontaneous act of compassion would lead to any significant changes in her life. The man had seemed grateful but disoriented. He hadn't told her his name or explained how he had ended up buried in the woods. Natalie assumed he was probably a hiking enthusiast who had encountered some kind of accident, or perhaps someone who had gotten lost and fallen into an old pit. She never suspected that she had just saved the life of one of the region's most prominent businessmen. She had no idea that his disappearance had triggered a massive search effort involving police, private investigators, and media coverage. Natalie returned home that afternoon and resumed her normal routine. She picked up Leo from daycare, helped him with his homework, prepared dinner, and read him bedtime stories. The extraordinary morning gradually became just another memory in their collection of shared adventures. She had no way of knowing that the man whose life she had saved was already working to find her, or that her decision to help a stranger would soon bring opportunities and challenges she had never imagined possible. The news broke 2 days later on every major media outlet in the region. Prominent businessman Edward Vance found alive after a 3-day disappearance. The headlines dominated local television, radio, and newspaper coverage. Edward Vance was the CEO and primary owner of Vance Industries, a technology company that employed over 2,000 people across 3 states. His sudden disappearance from his office on Tuesday afternoon had triggered an immediate investigation. When his car was found abandoned on a remote mountain road, authorities had feared the worst. The story of his rescue was even more compelling than his disappearance. According to hospital records and police reports, an unidentified woman had found Vance buried alive in the woods and had dug him out with her bare hands. She had driven him to the hospital, provided basic information to staff, and then disappeared before anyone could properly thank her or gather detailed information. "This woman saved my life," Vance told reporters from his hospital bed. "She risked her own safety to help a complete stranger. I owe her everything, and I don't even know her name." The hospital had only a partial name and a general description. A young woman, probably late 20s, with brown hair, accompanied by a small child. She had given her first name as Natalie, but hadn't provided a last name or detailed contact information. Within hours of the news coverage, tips began pouring in from people who thought they might know the mysterious rescuer. The police were flooded with calls from individuals claiming to be the woman who had saved Vance, but none of them could provide details that matched the hospital's records. Dr. Margaret Phillips, who had treated Vance when he arrived at the hospital, appeared on the evening news to appeal for the woman to come forward. "This person performed an extraordinary act of courage and compassion," Dr. Phillips said. "Mr. Vance was in critical condition when she brought him in. If she had arrived even an hour later, the outcome could have been very different." But Natalie Moore remained completely unaware of the media frenzy surrounding her actions. She didn't watch television news regularly, focusing instead on educational programs for Leo. She didn't read newspapers or follow current events online. Her days were filled with work, childcare, and household responsibilities that left little time for staying informed about regional news. It was Leo's daycare teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who first made the connection. "Natalie," Mrs. Henderson said when she picked up Leo on Friday afternoon, "I saw the strangest thing on the news yesterday. They're looking for a woman named Natalie who saved some businessman's life in the woods. You didn't happen to help someone earlier this week, did you?" Natalie was surprised by the question. "I did help a man who was hurt in the forest on Tuesday, but I didn't know he was anyone famous." Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. "Natalie, that man is Edward Vance. He owns one of the biggest companies in the state. The whole region has been talking about his rescue." That evening, Natalie finally watched the news coverage online. She was shocked to see the man she had helped identified as a prominent CEO worth millions of dollars. The reports described him as a philanthropist and job creator whose disappearance had worried thousands of employees and community members. But what surprised Natalie most was the intense effort being made to find her. Vance had apparently hired private investigators to track down his rescuer. He was offering a substantial reward for information leading to her identification. He had appeared on multiple news programs, expressing his desire to thank her properly. "I need to find this woman," Vance said in one television interview. "She gave me back my life when she could have simply walked past. That kind of selflessness deserves recognition." Natalie felt uncomfortable with the attention her actions were receiving. She had helped someone because it was the right thing to do, not because she wanted publicity or reward. The idea of being labeled a hero or receiving money for her assistance felt wrong to her. Nevertheless, Several of her neighbors and acquaintances began recognizing her from the news descriptions. Mike, the owner of the diner where she worked, approached her during her Friday evening shift. "Natalie, are you the woman who saved Edward Vance?" he asked directly. When she confirmed that she was, Mike was amazed. "Do you realize how many people are looking for you? Vance is offering a $10,000 reward just for information about who you are." Word spread quickly through their small community. By Saturday morning, several people had called the tip line provided by the police, identifying Natalie as Vance's rescuer. The attention made Natalie nervous, but she was even more concerned about how it might affect Leo. She didn't want her son to be subjected to media scrutiny or to learn that helping others was something people did for money or fame. Sunday afternoon, as Natalie was helping Leo build a fort in their living room, she heard a car pulling into their apartment complex parking lot. Through the window, she could see an expensive black sedan that looked out of place in their modest neighborhood. A man in a business suit emerged from the car and began walking toward her building. He carried a manila envelope and had the purposeful stride of someone conducting official business. Natalie knew instinctively that her quiet life was about to change dramatically. The knock on Natalie's door came at exactly 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon. She had been expecting it since she saw the black sedan pull into the parking lot. Leo was napping on the couch, exhausted from a morning spent building elaborate pillow forts and playing superhero rescue games. Through the peephole, Natalie could see a well-dressed man in his 50s holding a large envelope. He looked professional but not threatening. When she opened the door, he smiled politely and introduced himself. "Ms. Moore, I'm Robert Chen, Mr. Edward Vance's personal assistant. Mr. Vance would very much like to meet with you to express his gratitude for what you did earlier this week." Natalie had expected this visit but still felt unprepared for it. "Mr. Chen, that's very kind, but it's really not necessary. I'm just glad he's okay." "Mr. Vance was hoping you might say that," Robert replied with a knowing smile. "Which is exactly why he'd like to meet you in person. Would you be available this evening? He could come here, or, if you prefer, we could arrange to meet somewhere else." Natalie glanced back at Leo, who was still sleeping peacefully. "I suppose we could meet briefly, but I don't want any publicity or media attention. This has already gotten much bigger than it needed to be." "Mr. Vance completely understands that concern," Robert assured her. "This would be a private meeting. No cameras, no reporters." They arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant in the next town at 7 o'clock. Natalie's neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, agreed to watch Leo for a few hours, something she had done many times before when Natalie worked evening shifts. The restaurant Robert had chosen was upscale but not ostentatious. When Natalie arrived, she immediately recognized Edward Vance sitting at a corner table. He looked much better than he had when she'd pulled him from the woods, clean, well-dressed, and healthy, but his eyes held the same intensity she remembered. Edward stood when he saw her approaching. "Ms. Moore, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me." They sat down and Edward studied her face for a moment. "You look exactly as I remembered. I've been replaying that morning in my mind constantly, and your face was the one clear thing I could recall." Natalie felt slightly uncomfortable with his intense attention. "Mr. Vance, I'm glad you're feeling better. What happened to you in those woods?" Edward's expression darkened. "It's a long story involving corporate espionage and personal betrayal. The important thing is that you saved my life when you could have simply walked past." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a bank card. "I want you to have this. It contains $500,000. I know that might seem like an arbitrary amount, but it represents my gratitude for what you gave me." Natalie stared at the card but didn't reach for it. "Mr. Vance, I can't accept that. Please call me Edward. And why can't you accept it? You saved my life. That's worth far more than any amount of money." "Because I didn't save your life for money," Natalie replied quietly. "I saved your life because leaving someone to die is wrong. If I take money for it now, it changes what it was." Edward looked puzzled. "I don't understand the distinction you're making. If I accept payment for helping you, then what I did becomes a transaction, a service provided in exchange for compensation. But that's not what it was. It was just one human being helping another human being." Natalie paused, trying to articulate something she felt deeply but had never had to explain before. "I have a 4-year-old son," she continued. "Every day, I'm trying to teach him how to be a good person, how to help others when they need help, how to do the right thing even when it's difficult or inconvenient. Edward listened intently as she spoke. If I come home tonight with a $500,000 bank card and tell him it's because mommy helped someone, what lesson does that teach him? That kindness is profitable? That you should help people because you might get rewarded? But you deserve to be rewarded, Edward protested. You took a risk. You spent time and energy. You could have been hurt yourself. I was rewarded, Natalie said simply. I was rewarded by knowing that you're alive and safe. I was rewarded by being able to teach my son what it looks like to help someone in need. Those rewards are worth more to me than money. Edward sat back in his chair, clearly struggling to understand her perspective. Most people would take the money without a second thought. Maybe, but I'm not most people, and I don't want to be most people. They talked for another hour. Edward told her more about his business and his foundation work. Natalie shared stories about Leo and her various jobs. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, they found common ground in their shared values about helping others. When the evening ended, Edward tried once more to convince Natalie to accept some form of financial assistance. At least let me help with your son's education fund, he offered. Or health care costs. Something practical that would make your life easier. Natalie shook her head with a gentle smile. Edward, the best way you can thank me is by living a good life. Use whatever time I helped give you back to make the world a little better. That's all the thanks I need. As they parted ways, Edward realized he had met someone who challenged everything he thought he knew about gratitude, generosity, and what truly matters in life. 3 weeks after their restaurant meeting, Edward Vance called a press conference that would shock the entire business community. The conference room at Vance Industries was packed with reporters, employees, and investors, all expecting routine corporate announcements. Instead, they were about to hear a story that would change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, Edward began, his voice steady but emotional. 3 weeks ago, someone tried to kill me. They buried me alive in the woods and left me to die. If not for an extraordinary woman named Natalie Moore, I would not be standing here today. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. This was the first time Edward had revealed the true circumstances of his disappearance. Until now, the official story had been vague, mentioning only that he had been found injured in the woods. The person responsible for my attempted murder was someone I trusted completely, Edward continued. My personal assistant of 7 years, Marcus Webb, had been embezzling funds from our charitable foundation and selling company secrets to competitors. When I discovered his activities, he decided that killing me was preferable to facing the consequences. Edward paused, letting this revelation sink in. Marcus Webb had been arrested 2 days earlier after an extensive investigation revealed the scope of his betrayal. But I'm not here to talk about Marcus Webb, Edward said. I'm here to talk about Natalie Moore, a single mother who was walking through the woods with her 4-year-old son when they found me. She could have called for help and waited for others to handle the situation. Instead, she dug me out with her bare hands. Edward's voice grew stronger as he continued. When I offered to repay her with money, she refused. When I offered to help with her son's education or her own financial needs, she refused. She told me that accepting payment would change the nature of what she had done. That kindness given for reward is no longer kindness. The room was completely silent now, reporters hanging on every word. Natalie Moore taught me something I had forgotten in my decades of business success. She reminded me that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold. They can only be given freely from one human being to another. Edward gestured to a large screen behind him, which displayed the logo of a new organization. Today I'm announcing the creation of the Natalie Moore Foundation for Community Heroes. This foundation will identify and support individuals who perform extraordinary acts of kindness without expectation of reward. It will provide resources to help these heroes continue their work and expand their impact. The revelation drew gasps from the audience. Edward was not only establishing a foundation in Natalie's name, but also fundamentally changing his approach to philanthropy. But more importantly, Edward continued, I'm announcing that Natalie Moore has agreed to serve as the foundation's executive director. She will have complete autonomy to determine how our resources are used to support community heroes across the region. This announcement was news to everyone in the room, including most of Edward's staff. He had spent weeks convincing Natalie to take on this role, not through offers of money, but by showing her how the foundation could amplify the kind of helping behavior she believed in. After the press conference, Edward found Natalie in his office, where she had been watching the proceedings on television with Leo, who was on spring break from preschool. "How do you feel about having a foundation named after you?" Edward asked. "Overwhelmed," Natalie admitted, "but also excited about what we can accomplish." Leo looked up from the coloring book Edward had provided for him. "Mama, are you famous now?" "Not famous, sweetheart," Natalie replied. "Just lucky to have an opportunity to help more people." Edward knelt down to Leo's level. "Your mama is the bravest person I've ever met. She saved my life, and now she's going to help us save other people too." "Like a superhero?" Leo asked excitedly. "Exactly like a superhero," Edward confirmed. The Foundation's first initiative would address something Natalie understood intimately: supporting single parents who were struggling to balance work and childcare. The program would provide emergency assistance, job training, and community connections for families in crisis. "I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed and alone," Natalie explained to Edward as they reviewed the program details. "I want to make sure other parents know they have support." The second initiative would create a network of community heroes, ordinary people who regularly helped others in their neighborhoods. The foundation would provide small grants to expand their impact and connect them with resources they needed. "The goal isn't to pay people for being kind," Natalie clarified. "It's to remove obstacles that prevent them from helping others." Edward had initially struggled to understand this distinction, but Natalie's approach was already showing results. The Foundation's pilot programs had identified dozens of individuals whose quiet acts of service were making significant differences in their communities. During the weeks of planning, Edward had watched Natalie work and had come to understand why she had refused his money. She approached problems with creativity and compassion rather than just throwing financial resources at them. She listened to people's actual needs rather than assuming what they needed. Most importantly, she preserved the dignity of everyone she helped. "You've changed how I think about everything," Edward told her as they prepared to launch the Foundation's first programs. "Business, money, success, purpose. You've made me question all of it." "I didn't change anything," Natalie replied. "I just reminded you of what you already knew, but had forgotten." As the press conference coverage spread across social media and news outlets, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People were inspired by Natalie's refusal to accept payment for saving Edward's life. They were excited about a foundation that would support community heroes without bureaucracy or complicated application processes. But for Natalie, the most meaningful response came from Leo, who had watched the entire press conference with wide-eyed wonder. "Mama," he said that evening as she tucked him into bed, "you really are a superhero, aren't you?" "We're all superheroes, Leo," Natalie replied. "Every time we help someone who needs help, every time we're kind to someone who's having a hard day, every time we choose to do the right thing even when it's difficult, that's being a superhero." Leo thought about this for a moment. "Then I want to be a superhero too." "You already are, sweetheart," Natalie said, kissing his forehead. "You already are. How do you feel knowing the truth?" Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Heroine so you never miss incredible stories like this one. 1 year later, Natalie Moore sat in her new office, reviewing applications for the Foundation's latest round of Community Hero Grants. The space was bright and welcoming, with children's artwork on the walls and comfortable chairs arranged in conversation circles rather than formal meeting setups. Leo, now 5 years old and in kindergarten, sat at a small table in the corner, working on his homework while Natalie finished her afternoon tasks. The Foundation's policy of family-friendly workspaces had been Natalie's idea, and it had become one of their most popular innovations. "Mama, Mrs. Johnson says I'm really good at helping other kids with their math," Leo announced, looking up from his worksheets. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Natalie replied. "How does it feel to help your classmates?" "It feels like being a superhero," Leo said with a grin that lit up his entire face. The Natalie Moore Foundation had exceeded everyone's expectations in its first year. They had provided support to over 300 families facing crisis situations. They had funded 47 community hero projects, from neighborhood food gardens to senior citizen support networks to literacy programs for struggling readers. But perhaps most importantly, they had changed the conversation about helping others in their region. Instead of viewing community support as something provided by large institutions or government agencies, people were beginning to see it as something neighbors could provide for each other. Edward Vance had become not just a partner in the foundation's work, but a genuine friend to Natalie and Leo. He stopped by the office regularly, sometimes to discuss foundation business, but often just to check in and share stories about his own evolving approach to life and business. "I used to measure success by profit margins and stock prices," he told Natalie during one of these visits. "Now I measure it by how many people we've helped and how many connections we've made between community members." The foundation's success had brought Natalie recognition and opportunities she had never imagined. She had been invited to speak at conferences about community engagement and grassroots philanthropy. Universities had asked her to consult on their social work programs. Other foundations wanted to replicate their model, but Natalie remained grounded in the same principles that had guided her decision to help a stranger buried in the woods. She accepted speaking engagements only when they could help spread the foundation's message. She consulted with other organizations only when it might help them serve their communities more effectively. Most importantly, she made sure that Leo remained her first priority. No matter how busy the foundation became, she was always available for school events, bedtime stories, and weekend adventures. On this particular afternoon, as spring sunlight streamed through the office windows, Natalie felt a deep sense of satisfaction with the life they had built together. The foundation was thriving, but more importantly, Leo was thriving. He was learning that helping others was a normal part of daily life, not something extraordinary or unusual. "Mama," Leo said, putting down his pencil, "remember when you found that man in the woods?" "I remember," Natalie replied. "Do you think if we hadn't taken that path that day, none of this would have happened?" Natalie considered the question seriously. "Maybe not this exactly, but I think good things happen when people choose to help each other. If it hadn't been that morning, it would have been some other opportunity. So we would still be superheroes? We would still be ourselves," Natalie said. "And ourselves is pretty good." Edward appeared in the doorway, carrying coffee for Natalie and a juice box for Leo. "How are my favorite superheroes today?" "We're good," Leo announced. "Mama says we would be superheroes no matter what." "Your mama is absolutely right," Edward agreed. "Being a superhero isn't about having special powers. It's about using whatever powers you have to help other people." As the afternoon wound down and they prepared to head home, Natalie reflected on the simple truth that had guided her from the beginning. When you can help someone, you help them. Not because you'll get something back, but because that's what connects us all as human beings. The mist that had filled the forest on that morning 1 year ago had long since burned away. But the clarity it had revealed about kindness, purpose, and what truly matters in life remained as clear as ever. A single act of courage, offered without expectation, can transform not just one life, but an entire community. Outside the foundation offices, the town buzzed with the quiet energy of neighbors helping neighbors, children learning to care for others, and ordinary people discovering their own capacity for extraordinary kindness. If you believe that one act of courage can create lasting change, please subscribe to Hidden Heroine. Let's spread these inspiring stories together.